Hello and welcome to this Fireside chat at the Desk for Ukraine conference. With me, I have two really experienced programmers of whom we'll try to grab a little bit of the knowledge, extract it and distill it for you so that you can learn and we can share this. So with me, I have Andreas and Saša. And Andreas, could you please quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I have a very long, very confusing CV. The more short, more interesting version is I was CTO and founding team at Product Hunt. We sold to AngelList. At AngelList, I led like engineering teams in the crypto team, which is called CoinList, and also worked on product engineering in the talent team, which is like the job sites of AngelList, if you know them. Nowadays, I'm CTO at OnDeck, which is like an online accelerator for careers. And on the side, I invest a little bit in startups.
Like remote.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering, is this one of those cases where the sponsor gets like a panel seat, although they have nothing to
say? you have a little seat. And Saša, tell us about you.
Hi. So long story short, I've been developing software for the past 20 years. And in the past 10 years or so, my focus has been on the Beam platform. So mainly Elixir programming language and also earlier a little bit of Erlang. And these days I'm focusing more on helping teams work with Elixir, use it in production and adopting this technology.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that was one of the first things that jumped out to me when I sort of like looked at the two CVs before we got here, and I was like, oh, wow. Like the first entry for both of them starts in the year 2001. And when I sort of like wrote it back, like I think I was in maybe 7th grade or something. And I'm also, not the youngest anymore. When I've also been working for like 8 years and I'm a staff engineer. So, while I think I have some experience, both of you have, a lot more experience than I do. And like, 20 years is a long time and there's a lot to learn in that time. And that's sort of what we want to talk about today. And so the first thing that I want to throw in the room basically is sort of like you get a call from someone to start a new company, get on a new project, and it's a complete greenfield project that you want to set up. What are the things that you try to watch out for? What are the things that you try to do right because you've seen them go wrong and now this time you want to do them right?
Saša, you want to go first?
I wanted to actually let you go first because of your more management focus.
Damn it. First Tobias calling me old and now this.
I'm sorry.
A part of the fact that you should really double check when you like join a team that very early, if they know what they're doing, what the founding team is, what they're building, all this kind of stuff, like do your homework. When it actually comes to the main implementation, pick a stack that you understand really well. Early on, it's mainly about figuring out if the thing you build actually makes sense. So iteration speed is like the most important factor here. And the second one I would always advise is when you build out stuff, when you like build code that you sooner or later has to be under management, build in a way that's easy to delete, because sooner or later you will have to delete it.
Cool, but I have a follow-up there. What do you mean? So like do your homework, do your due diligence on the team? What do you mean?
This is like true for any job. Like when you join a company, you need to double check if this is worth your time, worth your life. Like it's a part of your life, even if it's only a few years. Like this will be a part of your life. Will define a lot of like your happiness and your future. So basically do the homework, double check if this is worth your time, and if it's like a very early stage company, and you are planning to stay a little bit longer on that, like if it's a freelance project, obviously a different discussion, but if you plan to join like as an actual like long-term commitment, make sure that the team has same values as you, understands what you're thinking about, like they understand the market, understand the product and so on, so that you can actually excel at your part because they excel at their part.
Cool, thank you. Saša, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a great advice. I was once in situation when I was joining like very early phase startup and very early phase project, and basically I wanted to myself make sure that that the idea makes sense and the whole this product is not something that I just don't agree or don't see the point at, and that the team seems nice, and someone I can work with. And otherwise, I would say, speaking about values, to me, this is perhaps the most important thing about starting a new venture, as a team effort, right? So I think it's essential to distinguish between we are just a bunch of people thrown together versus we actually try to work as a team, right? And so to me, I think it makes it's the most important to somehow establish a core set of shared values, And I know that it sounds like sort of motto for some marketing and whatnot, but it's really, I think, if you want to work as a team, we need to have some shared set of values, because otherwise it's just not gonna play out very, very nice. So I think that we should figure out, like, we definitely, of course, want to provide business value, but I also think it's important to organize the code, just as a note for the viewers. I'm going to speak mostly from the developer's perspective today. So we want to organize our codes in a way that we can keep on providing business value down the road, right? Because it's not like we are going to be done in 1 month or 2 months, it's a perpetual activity. And, otherwise be nice to each other, help each other, basically understand that we are all in the same boat, and basically we are as good as everyone on the team. So we basically need to lift our teammates up if they are falling behind for whatever reasons, or if they cannot be productive for whatever reasons, and vice versa, right? So this will be, to me, the most important thing about starting the new venture. Technology, what Andreas said, something that you're comfortable with, something that can help you with quick start, because if you're when you're starting, you're exploring the business area, you're really not completely certain what you want to build. And if at the same time you also have to explore like a completely new technology, then it's going to be like double the challenge, or even more, maybe even more complex than that. So even as an Elixir sort of self-appointed evangelist, I sometimes advise to people, like, you don't really maybe need Elixir, at least not at this point, if you're not really comfortable with it, like why did you pick that thing,
Yeah, thank you. And so I love that, we started talking about values and the team first, and sort of like code second, and like the alignment between the team. And it's really interesting. I remember I once interviewed for like a very early stage CTO job, and was sitting there in an interview with sort of the co-founders. And then I was like, okay, sort of like, what are your values? How do you work together? And they sort of like looked at each other and tried to sort of like make it up as they go. And they had been working together for half a year. And I was like, oh, they were like, oh, that was really good. Maybe we should do a workshop about this. And I was like, yeah, maybe you should, if I joined, we should really talk about this and see what's happening. But at the same time, I often feel sort of like values are one of those things that are easily said, but it's very, very hard to do right. Like I've been in places, and I've seen places where, the values were a poster on the wall, but like nobody actually lived those values. They would maybe point at the values to just get their thing through. So they would weaponize the values to get what they want, but they wouldn't actually live by the values most of the time. So anyone have any sort of like
values, or
how do you have these values and keep them?
Values is what people do, not what people say, So like all these workshops and these lists of values quite frequently are just bullshit. Yeah. A company in the end is people trying to make decisions together, and the better decisions they make, the more successful the company will be. And if you notice that they're already doing like weird decisions early on, like micro decisions that are weird, like interactions and this kind of stuff, you can assume that this will like extrapolate into the future as well. And this is usually the area where you actually notice the real values, So like, for example, like directly asking them for values might be hard, unless they did a workshop, and then it's most likely bullshit. So like rather look how they interact with you, how they interact with people who are not like you, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say that values is maybe a synonym for culture, right? And culture spreads kind of like a virus, I'm not going to say COVID because it's still too well, I said it obviously.
Too soon, yeah.
But cut this part out. So what I want to say is, like, let's say that the three of us are in a team, for example, right? And we are just, developers, we are coding. And so I maybe am a bad agent or bad member. So I just, hack and whack, push directly to the main branch without consulting, rewrite your type of code into my type of code and so on. And ultimately, everyone's going to start doing it, right? On the other hand, if I try to play nicer, maybe make some pull requests, ask for review, discuss with you in a more open-minded way, right, where I accept criticism and accept proposals and different kind of ideas, then that's going to spread, And so basically, I think that like when the team is very small, you establish some values and then you just sort of share those values, not by some workshops and whatnot, but simply by behaving the way we behave. And I think that the Elixir community is a nice example of that. So those of us who has been early around, remember how Jose was always very nice, very constructive. And, even when someone would be more aggressive, he would always, respond nicely with arguments. And I think that this kind of attitude sort of spread wider in the community as the time went on. So I would say that this is a good example of how it just, it spread simply by doing it, by practicing it, right? Rather than by preaching, you should do this and this and this.
Yeah, it's always lead by example, that's always, I don't know, I always have the highest expectation for myself. So like, I'm very punctual, so very typical German. So like when I'm a minute late for a meeting, I'm like, no, I'm sacrificing all my values. Now nobody needs to be on time anymore because I'm late. So I always stress about that quite a lot more than I should. So yeah, that's okay. That's cool. So we talked about the values, and we said technology doesn't really, matters, but doesn't matter that much. Take something that iterate and find out what sort of the business is, what the domain is, and use what you're comfortable with. But looking at that, we all have sort of like, let's say, a favorite piece of technology that maybe, when we start a project, if we say like, okay, I'll bring this with me because this has served me very, very well in the past. And I just wondered if, is that just me? Do you have like that piece of technology that you would bring into almost any new project? And if so, what would it be? And, why would it be that kind of technology?
Saša, what do you have?
Well, for me, unsurprisingly, when we talk about technology in particular, then it would be, of course, Elixir, right? So it's, I tried different things. Well, I not tried, I used different things in the past. My early starts were with C++, then C#, then Ruby, lots of JavaScript at some point, and Erlang, and then Elixir. This is where I settled for the past 10 years. And I'm hoping I won't have to change that, at least, for the time being, given what's currently in the offering, meaning no disrespect to other technologies, of course, but this is really that somehow hits the right chords for me. But, having said that, again, technology, I'm not going to say it's unimportant, it's very important, right? This is what we use to build software, but realistically, you can do things in other technologies as well, and people have been doing it. But either way, just to explain briefly, roughly speaking, I had this talk which demonstrates in more details called Soul of Erlang and Elixir. So the core of it is the Beam platform, the virtual machine designed for Erlang back in the day, which really supports well writing fault-tolerant and scalable systems, but it works well even if you don't really need to work on a super scale. And then Elixir is kind of like sort of like an icing on the cake. I feel that I may be not giving it enough credit, but it basically gives us tools, or the philosophy it uses is very developer-oriented, developer-friendly, so we can actually start pretty quickly, be productive very early on, and still, if we need to scale or if we need to write complex software, it's the language allows us, and of course the underlying runtime allows us that. So I think that it's a really nice combination between starting quickly, starting simple, but at the same time being able to go very far and implement very complex pieces of software.
Cool, thank you. Andreas, anything came to mind?
I cannot think of anything that I have not used in some other project. You know what I mean? I assume we don't count Git, for example.
We can count Git,
that feels like cheating. I'm very strongly opinionated about a lot of stuff. Like if I have to have an API to the front end, it will be GraphQL and this kind of like things that I just strongly believe in. But I also did the exact opposite. It like really depends on the project and like what you already have in the setup. Like if it's a fresh project, it really depends. Yeah, in the end, it doesn't matter. That's like my take. Like whatever you're comfortable. Like it's kind of my take here.
Yeah, technology is kind of difficult to transfer, right? You come to a different company and maybe they use a completely different stack, and it's questionable whether it makes sense to even use a completely different technology and whether that's going to be met with some enthusiasm. So yeah, I remember when I, after some 5 years of working with C#, went to a different company that was just using Ruby, and yeah, that pretty much made no sense. So I had to learn a different kind of language, right? But one thing that I try to transfer, ever since I started doing it is it's not a technology, but rather a philosophy of working, of organizing the commit history well, and working in small increments, in small pull requests, if you will, like if there are code reviews. So rather than giving you this large pull request with a single commit, I'm trying to always focus it, reduce the scope as much as possible so people can grasp it and then they can produce quality reviews. And increasingly, I'm working proactively to make the history clean, So if I go a little bit forward and I see okay, this history is a mess, I'm at the right place where I want to be code-wise, but the history is not good, then I'm going to just return and rewind in a more understandable way for the reader, for the reviewers, right, to make their job easier. And I think that this is actually, not to make myself look perfect, this actually aids, helps reviewers, do the better job faster. And of course, I want the better job. I want to have better reviews. And so these days, my progress is more like, instead of just typing code frantically until I get something working, it's more like, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, and then, deliberately doing this so I can help other people on the team assess the quality of that work better, right?
The few technologies that I will introduce in any project very instantly is everything that makes asynchronous work. I call it like single player mode. Like this Super Mario would be really boring if you press jump and then you have to wait for somebody, you know what I mean? So like anything you can do for single player optimization is like useful. Big fan of like linters, like as many as possible almost. Like it honestly doesn't matter which style, it doesn't matter which best practices, as long as the company sticks to it, and as long as like somebody who's working instantly sees what they're doing right or wrong. I'm always the first person to very aggressively take notes in meetings and like on very clear, like what is a decision, what is just like a suggestion, so that everybody else who afterwards comes can like get enough context without watching a 30-40 minute video, being very very clear, short communication in general, like anything that makes asynchronous communication work, asynchronous working styles work in code or in teams is like, from my point of view, the number one thing I would always like introduce.
Yeah, the point about linters is really nice. The thing I like about this is that instead of, I recall in my early days of career, there will be a style guide document, like 40 pages of rules, which no one would really remember. And you just cannot really grasp that stuff. And you have like this automated tool that tells you, right, wrong. And okay, you don't have to think about it. It's not necessarily always perfect, but at least it really just takes a lot of mental burden,
Yeah, I mean, linters, CI, there were so many things that, like many years back were not normal. And today, they're just super normal. They help us a lot. And I think, what both of you were talking about was like removing blockers. I don't want to be blocked, and also, I mean, even like working in small increments is always good. And that also means that, because less changes are coupled together. That's the biggest thing that I hate about big pull requests, is that, you do these other drive-by changes. Now, all of a sudden, like either all of these 4 changes land or none of them lands, right? And so that keeps all of the other improvements back. And so, you increase cycle time, you need to deal with all of the merge conflicts and everything. So it's, it's pretty bad. But I'm quite surprised because, I mean, maybe that's my bias, my personal favorite technology, PostgreSQL, a Postgres, it's just solid. It can just do anything and everything, you want to do some NoSQL stuff,
100%.
sure, JSONB, full text search, what like indexing, it scales very, very well to like a very high degree. And like, there's all these features that work very solidly well. And so for me, it's always, no matter what programming language, whatever I do, I take my Postgres with me, and that is knowledge that will always help me. It will always be there for me.
Fully agree. Like we did in Postgres, you can also like have extensions to run V8, like Node.js code essentially. And we did this quite a bit actually in Product Hunt to have like very cheap workarounds and like not like implement a lot of complex infrastructure, just like let the database handle it kind of situations. Yeah, I mean, Postgres is like a no-brainer to me personally, but I also worked on very large apps that used MySQL,
It's a very versatile database, definitely. Yeah.
I mean, Shopify is running on MySQL, lots of, and I think Facebook is also running on MySQL. So it's like not a dig against it, but Postgres is just, I know. I mean, I don't want to, I want to throw shades. I think
it's kind of, going back to what I said, it's kind of hard for example, for me personally to say like, Postgres is the best, because I really honestly only used Microsoft SQL Server, which I also enjoyed, back when I was in the more on Microsoft focused world, in the first half of my career, or even less than that. And, it worked well. We didn't really write super big apps, so I cannot confirm about anything else, but it worked well. I never really used seriously other databases like MySQL or Oracle and whatnot. So I have no idea, but people are again using those things to build large systems. So beyond doubt, they are working, right? That's demonstrable. So just like with Elixir, I have the urge, to always say that Elixir is to me really the best, or at least it hits the sweet spot for anything backend side. I honestly think that it hits just the right notes. But I understand if people are writing it in other technologies as well. Even though I personally would like to avoid this in the future as much as possible.
Wonderful. So speaking of things, to avoid, hopefully you have some stories up, but like one of the things that I feel like we don't talk about enough is failure. Like we all give these great conference talks and we're like, oh, this worked great. This is the best thing ever. And everybody goes like, yay, best thing ever. But there are way too few talks where we talk about, like I did this thing, it absolutely did not work. It was horrific. We needed to roll everything back. I did this huge mistake. And I think usually we can learn even better sort of from mistakes than from success, because we made a mistake and now we realize the mistake and it's like, next time I encounter the situation, we should do this differently. So can any of the two of you, like hopefully both, share a story of sort of like a failure, a mistake that you made or the company made, and sort of what you took away from it and what would you do differently the next time it comes around?
Yeah, I have a list longer than our meeting. Number one is the classic one is over-engineering, over-design. Like that happened more than once to me. My biggest learning here is if you isolate well and you worry more about the interfaces between those isolations, like the components or whatever you want to think of them, that matters much more than the code in those isolations, So if those like pass the linter and they do their job and they have some basic tests like done, it matters much more that you have like a good isolation that makes it easy to delete and like the iteration speed. So like over design is like I ruined more than one company through over design, I think. The other one is this is like now maybe a contradiction, I don't know. It's not making like big enough product bets sometimes, So you end up iterating on small changes that actually don't move the needle, instead of actually tackling something that potentially, like obviously you need to be careful and test and experiment. That's something that completely opens up a new area for the business, That's something that we did like a little bit like too much too engineering minded POV on stuff. And my biggest learning here is very frequently, sometimes you just need to find, or I think a good analog is here. You can take the same technology, sell it and struggle, and then slightly spin it for a different product positioning. And it's exactly the same thing. It's just slightly spun, slightly sold to a different customer, and all of a sudden it works like magic, So sometimes you need to make these repositionings or maybe even bets on pivots and all this kind of stuff. And frequently the iteration speed you have for that, it like matters more than anything else that you do.
Cool, thank you. Saša?
Yeah, well, I had a privilege of working on a couple of failed projects. Yeah, in retrospect, it's kind of nice to have that experience too. And I would say that in all those cases, I think my impression is that the root of all problems was the lack of focus, what I would call. And so there are like two sides to the story. The one, from what I see as a developer, that happened on what I'm going to vaguely call product people. So those are people who are kind of driving the features, the product development. There was like a lot of we have to do this and this and this and this and this, and just a bunch of features being thrown in, and it all has to be done like yesterday. It's everything was super yes, and a lot of of kind of steering, like let's go left, let's go right, and of course I understand that you cannot really know upfront what you want. You have kind of a vague idea and you're searching for it, but that's one thing. And a completely different thing is if you're just very very frantically, very frequently changing, completely changing your direction, and like one day you're going one direction, the other then another, then third day you return again back, and so that was very, very frustrating and hard to keep up. And perhaps the worst thing was that what I've seen in a couple of projects which failed was that there was actually a lack of concrete statements. So like people would say, we want something very, very fluffy, but we want this yesterday. Of course, it's always yesterday, right? And here I kind of entered the developer story, where I think one major problem of development was that we didn't really have a good attitude. We didn't just do a sort of pushback, like, okay, hang on a second, we can't really deliver what you want because we don't even understand what you're asking from us. Instead of that, we would just, go to the keyboard and type frantically, over design, definitely what Andreas mentioned, so we can cover our bases, because we knew that we're going to have to change direction. So we tried to prepare for that upfront. This was a colossal mistake. I like to say, drawing from this experience, it would be more profitable, more efficient for everyone if we just didn't do anything. If we just stared at the wall or surf the net, read the portals and whatnot. That would be better than what we actually did, because once we would get something concrete, then it was so different from what we built that the existing work was actually getting in the way of what we were supposed to be doing. So there's definitely that. And then I would say developers really have a different kind of sin. Again, lack of focus, in the sense that we tend to get very fascinated by shiny technologies, new tools and whatnot. I call this like hacker news driven development. So that's one thing. And then if we do pay some attention to the design of code, we also tend to over design. We go like full-blown DDD to implement a simple to-do list or something like that. And ultimately that design, that code architecture doesn't serve its purpose. It actually also goes in the way of keeping that progress. So yeah, I would say that this is kind of in those couple of failures, this would be the root causes, in my opinion.
Yeah, I want to tack on to the focus part, because one story that really stuck to me that happened was I was working at the same-day delivery company, and we were implementing a new feature so that people could actually reschedule their shipment. So they would be like, oh, I'm not home today, send it to me in 3 days or something. And we built almost the entire feature, it was almost ready to release, until we realized that we're not sending an email out early enough for people to do that, because the first time we used to send the email out was when it was already dispatched to a tool. So at that point, it would already be sorted and picked. And so nobody ever sat down and looked at the entire process. It's like, from all perspectives, customers, the hub, our partners and everything, and went through the entire thing. And that's something that I think is often missing, because, I said, we want to build everything so fast, like, okay, build this. And that's, where I think great product managers come in and really pull you back and say like, hey, let's settle down, let's think through the whole process. Let's actually see like what is available at what time and do that. And here I got to do a quick shout out to my PM, Simona, who is currently on parental leave, because he did the same thing with me last time when we had a big problem. Was like, no, Toby, don't change this yet. And then we actually look at the pros, and the change had to happen somewhere completely different. And that way, you can really, as you said, sometimes the best code you can write is no code, or just sit around and wait until you really figure out what the problem is and you start building it. So I really, really want to emphasize that.
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like an old man yelling at the cloud, I feel that like a big issue of our industry, and perhaps even the humanity in general, is that we're just obsessed about quantity and speed way too much than other kind of things, like thinking things through. Maybe it feels like sort of a lost art.
It's also like sometimes cheap when people think of like engineering teams as the people who have to implement what has been decided kind of positioning, which doesn't really work in early stage companies. Like in early stage companies, from my point of view, it's always like one product engineering team, and it's kind of the job of like everybody in there to figure out what to build, and in many cases, this kind of like left, right in the engineering team that happens for like product decisions is stuff that shouldn't even hit the engineering work already. It should be like maybe like experimented, maybe like landing pages, maybe there can be something built with like some basic no-code tools just to figure out if this path is actually the right one. And in many cases, like some of the best engineers I worked with actually helped doing that, or like pushed back and then like, hey, can we just like do like a quick experiment to see if there's a value in here? Meanwhile, those people will clean on something else up, and like you got like one more week to figure out if this is the right thing to do, some engineers I know even like just help others then to. So for example, at OnLake, we built like a lot of stuff also with no code. So with like Zapier and Airtable, because a lot of the web development business processes are essentially some random UI, something stored into a database, some side effect, and then like somebody editing stuff in the database and changing a state. And that's basically like a front-end Airtable Zapier. And as long as this product isn't like core mission critical, I don't want any engineer of mine to even touch this. When they hit product market fit, okay, let's talk, let's rebuild, like let's scaling. But until then, like do it yourself, like have fun, don't come here, figure out what you want, and then we can talk kind of situation.
Cool. So I think we're at time, but there's this one question I would really still like to ask both of you. So I will just do it, which is the classical question now. How do you keep the balance between like having a good and healthy code base and, shipping fast? Because, at times both of them can be at odds with each other. So how do you approach that problem?
Okay, maybe I'm gonna start now. So there is a great article by Martin Fowler. I think it's called "Is Quality Worth the Cost?" or something like that. I can try to find it later and send for some doc notes. And the quality here means really the quality of the code in the context of the article. And basically, Martin argues that this is a false trade-off. Essentially, he argues that quality makes us faster or makes the development cheaper, if you will, right? So I think that in general, going back to the start of this discussion, to me, one value about the code is really that this is a shared environment. This is the working environment for the developers. So this is where, as a developer, I spend most of my time in. And I have to, a lot of time I have to figure out the code that I didn't write myself. This happens in a team effort. Very frequently, I get a job at a company where the code base has been for some time. So a lot of that code has not been written by myself, and I wasn't there, and I need to figure something out about that. And I want this to be efficient. I want this code to communicate with me, because otherwise it's very mentally draining, energy draining, and it affects my mental health. I've been working in some terrible code bases, some of which I even wrote myself, unfortunately. And it's taking a mental toll, and it's affecting our ability to progress, which is really, really frustrating. And ultimately, we cannot deliver business value. So to me, this is really investing in code quality properly with the focus, actually means delivering business value more efficiently. Of course, occasionally, from time to time, as an exception, not a rule, we do have to cut some corners, right? So maybe there is an important business deadline that we need to meet, or maybe there is a critical bug, and I'm not just going to deliberate what's the best architectural approach to fix the bug. I'm going to fix the bug, ship the fix, and then maybe post-fact, clean up that code, right? So we have to be aware of those things, and as long as that's exception, I think that's perfectly fine. But if exception becomes a rule, then by definition it's not an exception anymore. And unfortunately, very frequently I've seen situations where people say like, oh, we're just gonna develop very fast, rapidly for like the next 6 months or so, and then we're gonna spend 2 weeks refactoring. That it doesn't really work like that. That's basically the technical. Yeah, the technical debt metaphor, and I think the technical debt really is more like you take a debt at the loan shark, not at the real bank. So those interests are just going very rapidly high up. So if you do even a month of rapid coding, you're gonna need, I would say, maybe at least a month, if not more, to clean that stuff up, because it builds up very quickly.
Yeah, I think the correct answer is it depends.
Always the correct answer.
And we're done for today. So I agree with the fact that quality creates speed, or differently put, momentum creates, like you don't look for speed, you look for momentum, and quality allows compounding. Like you build on top of stuff, and therefore you create more and more momentum, and therefore you have like ultimately a lot of more speed, So I completely agree with that. The one problem you have is typically when you're building a new product, and unless you just copy something, but then you have like a business risk. But if you're building a new product, you're usually kind of like this early on, trying to figure out exactly what you do, and then over time it stabilizes and becomes more and more like stable. The hardest thing early on is that you most likely are going to remove 50% of the code that you've written, and at some point rewrite 50% of the code that you've written because of scaling, nuance, additional, like basically one half won't work and the other half will work, and therefore force you to change it, and you don't know which is which, and in both cases you're going to touch it again. And so this is like why I come down to usually linters, automation, automated tests, like just to make it easy to like just build something okay, like in a state that's like easy to understand what's going on. Leave enough comments that people understood why you did certain shortcuts. Like don't explain the code, but like why you had to do the code like this, and like a few other things like this, and like focus mainly. This is like again like what I said a few times. Like make it easy to delete, because if it's easy to delete and you need to refactor it, and like somebody like Sasha comes in and they're like, holy shit, like we need to fix this. You know what? I can just like remove it and then like rebuild it. And that's most likely even easier than like nuance changes. So yeah, again, like it depends. Like later on, or like in general, automated tests, linting, good isolation, and in general, like quality is like the thing that creates momentum.
I would perhaps say that like in those early days, what we're building, at least in the cases that I've seen, is more of a prototype rather than the actual product, right? So we're not really certain what we want. We do want to have some demos for the people to see, and also to get some feedback. I had this situation at one company, well, actually at multiple projects when I think about it. And so, yeah, you definitely want to get some tangible to other people to see, and then get some feedback. And really, you can just, change directions very quickly, but that's the prototyping phase, right? And so I would say once we get more to the stable phase, we definitely want to salvage some ideas from the prototype. But one mistake that I've seen often is that prototype becomes the project itself, and that's kind of I have some reservations about that. People are practicing this a lot.
Yeah. I will go as far as saying it's almost in every successful code base I've seen. Unfortunately, because they were like really strict about quality, and then at some random moment, like a weird side idea, like got product market fit. And then they just like try to keep it alive forever. It's almost like I will go as far as saying it's almost like the default. There's like a saying that's super unpopular. It's basically there's two kinds of code bases: the one that goes successful, and the other ones that are beautiful. Yeah. Again, linters help a lot.
Also tests.
This is like the one thing that that's always like fascinating to me when people save time on automated testing.
Oh, God.
I'm not thinking of like you have to do DDD or perfect unit test. I'm like just like please introduce very good like vertical cutting tests integration tests or whatever that test the happy and the sad flow of the customer, so that you just know that the thing is actually working. You know what I mean? And like have plenty of those until they get too slow. And I'm always fascinated when people like quote unquote save time on those, and then afterwards are scared to change stuff. You know?
Yeah, definitely. This has been my philosophy. There was a great talk about it called, I think, TDD: What Went Wrong, and a lot of this focuses on higher level, behavior level tests. You know, so the author Ian Cooper, or the speaker, sorry, Ian Cooper says like test behavior, not implementation level details, right? And behavior means from the business value perspective. And this is what I want to do. I have been doing this in particular for the past few years and practicing with teams I've helped. And we had such great experiences with it, you know, especially, you know, my part of job was doing some post-factory refactoring for those teams to, you know, show them a different way of building things. And with good tests, I had so much confidence. We rarely broke anything because tests were really focused on the observable behavior of the system, which is what you want to test. No, meaning no disrespect to lower level or isolation level tests, you know, those have their value too. But what you said, basically behavior first, a lot of that, and then you can change the guts of your software, of your code, and be confident that it still works.
100%.
Yeah, without tests, I can't sleep. Wonderful. So linters, tests, and values, you know, if I would to take, you know, a few words, maybe that's not the right few words and we can find a better summary, but that's it. We're sort of like at time. I want to thank you both for taking the time to, you know, talk to me, talk with us, you know, at this wonderful conference, Death for Ukraine. Any last remarks that you want to make before we call it a day?
Well, thank you for the invitation. You know, it's been an honor. Thanks everyone for joining and for donating. And well, hopefully, you know, we'll see each other live at some point. You know, the things, at least COVID-wise, are looking better. So I'm hoping that the live conferences are going to start again soon.
Yeah, nothing much to say, like Slava Ukraini.
Thank you both very much. And yeah, please donate. And we'll see you at the next talk.